In the small, rural village of Eldridge Hollow, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the world with shades of orange and deep purple as it dipped below the jagged hills. The golden rays of daylight slowly faded, casting long, eerie shadows across the fields, where the grass danced softly in the cool evening breeze. The townsfolk, with their neatly thatched roofs and flower-filled gardens, huddled indoors, their windows flickering with the warm glow of oil lamps. They whispered tales that floated through the air like butterflies, stories of a woman dressed in white who lurked around the edges of town. The children listened wide-eyed as their parents shared stories of her sorrowful eyes and ghostly figure, which seemed to blend perfectly into the mist rolling in from the forest. It was said that she wandered among the trees, her long, flowing dress trailing behind her like a river of fog. The tales always began in the same haunting way: if you see her, something terrible will happen. This warning passed from parent to child with a mixture of fear and fascination, creating a shroud of unease that settled over the village like a heavy quilt. One chilly evening, with a crispness in the air that hinted at the arrival of autumn, a girl named Clara, curious and brave, decided to see if the stories were true. Clara was not like most of the children in the village. While others trembled at the mention of the woman in white, her heart yearned for adventure, thumping excitedly in her chest. She had listened to the whispers echoing through the dusty streets, but instead of fear, her eyes shimmered with a sense of curiosity. The idea of uncovering the truth sparked a fire within her, urging her forward. As dusk settled in, painting the world with shadows, Clara slipped quietly from her house. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, but she moved with careful grace, determined not to wake her parents. She tiptoed past the darkened rooms, her heart fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. She finally reached the door and slipped outside, feeling the cool night air wrap around her like a soft blanket. The moon hung high in the sky, a glowing orb that illuminated her path. With every step she took toward the forest, the dark trees loomed overhead, casting twisted and gnarled shapes that seemed to reach for her like fingers longing for a lost soul. Clara could feel her heart racing, but it was not from fear, it was from the thrill of the unknown, the possibility of finding something magical. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying secrets that danced just beyond her understanding. As she ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew thick and heavy, almost suffocating. An unsettling silence enveloped her, making the world outside feel distant and forgotten. The ground crunched beneath her shoes, and her breath echoed in the quiet surroundings, a reminder that she was alone. The path twisted ahead of her, illuminated by the pale glow of the moon, which hung like a watchful eye. Then, suddenly, she spotted her, a figure standing by a crumbling stone wall, her silhouette stark against the silvery night. The woman was dressed in white, her long hair cascading down her back like flowing water. The moonlight danced on her dress, revealing tattered edges that fluttered in the breeze. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could it really be her? The stories she had heard flooded her mind like a river, and she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The woman turned slowly, her face barely visible in the shadows, but Clara could still see her sorrowful, haunted expression. There was a deep sadness in her eyes that seemed to echo through the night, piercing Clara's heart. Is she real? Clara whispered to herself, her curiosity battling with the fear that crept in like a creeping vine. The woman's gaze seemed to lock onto hers, and Clara felt an involuntary shiver crawl down her spine, sending icy fingers through her body. She wanted to scream, to run back to the safety of her home, where the warm glow and comforting sounds of her family surrounded her. But her feet were rooted to the ground, unable to move. The stories had warned of the sinister consequences that came with the sighting of the ghostly figure. Clara's mind raced with the implications, yet the closer she stepped toward the woman, the more her curiosity ignited like a flame. She felt a magnetic pull, an urge to understand the woman's sorrow, to know what had happened, to summon her spirit into the world of the living. The darkness of the woods felt alive, as though it was inviting her further into its embrace. With trepidation, Clara inched closer to the woman, her heart pounding louder with each step. "Who are you?" Clara called out, her voice tremulous yet filled with determination. But as she spoke, the woods around her began to stir ominously. The woman in white raised her hand, slowly beckoning Clara nearer. "Your curiosity will be your undoing," the woman's voice echoed, thin and frail, as if it had traveled from a long-forgotten time. Clara hesitated for a moment, taking in the words that hung heavy in the air. The warning settled in her mind like a stone. Still, the pull of curiosity tugged at her heart, urging her to take another step forward. The moonlight illuminated the details of the woman's dress, and Clara noticed the stains that resembled dried blood, dark splotches that stood out starkly against the pale fabric. She wondered why no one had tried to help her. There was a deep ache in the woman's expression, a longing for something lost, something that Clara felt compelled to understand. But just as she thought she could reach out, to bridge the gap between their worlds, a loud crack echoed behind her. Clara spun around, startled, her heart racing as fear flooded her veins. A shadow darted behind a towering tree, and a sinking dread took root in her stomach. She turned back toward the woman in white, but to her horror, the figure was no longer there. Instead, a rapid chill engulfed her, causing her to gasp, and an invisible weight pressed down on her shoulders, as though the forest itself was trying to suffocate her spirit. Clara stumbled backward, her heart thundering in her chest as she raced away from the eerie depths of the woods. The familiar sights of the village seemed to taunt her, dancing in the periphery as she burst from the forest, wild-eyed and trembling. The warmth of home felt impossibly far away, and despite the love she held for her family, she knew they wouldn't believe her if she told them what she had seen. The images of the woman in white haunted her thoughts like ghosts, and each breath felt heavy with dread. That night, Clara lay in bed, enveloped in darkness. The shadows in her room tangled together like a twisted maze, and the familiar creaks of the old house made her jump, causing her heart to race. Each sound seemed to echo ominously, reminding her of the ghostly encounter. The image of the woman lingered in her mind, and as the moonlight streamed through her window, she thought she saw a figure lurking just beyond her sight, watching her. Fear settled into her bones like a cold winter chill, wrapping around her heart and squeezing tightly. She wished desperately for daylight to come, to chase away the malevolence that seemed to thicken the darkness outside. The world felt twisted and wrong, shadows dancing along the walls of her room, flickering like candle flames in a gentle wind. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, but the haunting memories refused to leave her mind. As she closed her eyes and surrendered to a restless sleep, a terrible truth settled deep within her. She had sought out danger, and now the darkness had embraced her, wrapping itself around her like an old, tattered cloak. Clara's dreams morphed into twisted nightmares, where echoes of the woman's sorrow surrounded her, creating an unsettling blend of sadness and fear. The ghostly figure lurked just beyond her, calling her name with an echoing cry, begging for understanding, for compassion, as the weight of her sorrow hung in the air. In the morning light, Clara would face the day with the haunting thoughts of the woman in white still fresh in her mind. She knew she had seen something real, something that would change her world forever. But for now, in the embrace of sleep, Clara was held captive by the gripping fear and swirling shadows, lost in a tale that was only just beginning. Morning light filtered through Clara's curtains, spilling warm golden rays onto the floor like a gentle hug. Yet, the horror of the night before still clung to her thoughts, heavy and oppressive. It was as if the shadows of the past had found a way to infect her morning. Outside her window, the village of Eldridge Hollow began to stir. Birds sang sweetly in the tall trees, their cheerful melodies a stark contrast to the dark feelings swirling around in Clara's heart. They were completely unaware of the looming darkness, the shadow of dread that hung over Clara. Clara cautiously joined the villagers as they gathered in the central square. The square bustled with life. Children were running about, their laughter ringing like chimes in the wind, while the adults exchanged pleasantries and wrapped themselves in gossip as if it were a warm coat. Clara felt a twisted knot in her stomach each time she heard their laughter. To her, it felt like they were playing a game, pretending everything was fine while hiding a truth that was far more chilling. She had witnessed the woman in white, and the image haunted her mind like a ghost refusing to fade away. Determined to seek answers, she mustered the courage to approach Mrs. Hawkins, the village elder who always seemed to know the stories of Eldridge Hollow better than anyone else. Clara had heard rumors that Mrs. Hawkins knew the tale of the woman in white all too well, like a well-read book. "What can you tell me about her?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly, edged with urgency. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to dive into unknown depths. Mrs. Hawkins's face turned pale as her eyes darted around the square, scanning for prying ears. She beckoned Clara to follow her, leading her away from the crowd to a shaded spot beneath an old and twisted tree. The gnarled branches seemed to cover them like a protective blanket, and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. The old woman's voice trembled as she spoke. "The woman is cursed, dear girl. Long ago, she suffered a tragic loss here in Eldridge Hollow. A child taken too soon, a betrayal that shattered her heart into unrecognizable fragments." Clara listened intently, heart racing, her previous curiosity twisting into a knot of unease. The story felt weighed down by sorrow, not just mere words. The townsfolk say her spirit lingers, searching for the one who wronged her. When she appears, it's often followed by misfortune, a sign that something in the balance of nature has been disturbed. As Mrs. Hawkins finished, Clara could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her like a heavy quilt, suffocating and ghostly. Had she disturbed something simply by looking upon the woman? A sense of dread washed over her, filling her with a growing fear that sent shivers down her spine. She needed to find answers before the dark figures in her nightmares sprang to life. Clara rushed home, her heart racing as a sense of urgency drove her footsteps. The information danced in her mind like swirling smoke, dark and ominous. Had she condemned herself by stepping into the ethereal realm of the woman in white? Days turned into weeks in a surreal blur. The village continued its daily routines, the sun rising and setting like clockwork, while inside her, a storm raged on. Clara awaited the night of the harvest moon, a night when the villagers believed the specter roamed free among them, as restless as a caged bird longing to soar. As the harvest moon rose, its glow spilling silver light across the land, Clara couldn't shake the growing unease. The air had grown thick with tension, almost suffocating, and she stayed away from the woods, fearing the consequences of venturing near the cursed grounds again. But deep inside her, an insatiable urge stirred. A desire to confront the truth became an obsession tugging at her heart. Each night, she returned to the place of her first encounter, but all she found were shadows shifting in the moonlight and the chill of the evening air caressing her skin. Rumors began to swirl within the village like a fierce wind, ominous tales filling the air. The villagers spoke of haunting misfortunes plaguing Eldridge Hollow. Cattle fell ill for no reason at all, crops withered overnight, turning brown and lifeless as if touched by an unseen hand. A fierce storm ripped through homes, causing roofs to crumble and windows to shatter like glass fragile dreams. In hushed conversations, people pointed fingers at one another, murmuring that the woman in white was claiming her victims, making them pay for the pain she endured in life, just as she had once suffered. Clara's heart sank with despair as the reality of their situation seeped into her soul. It was as if a dark cloud had settled over her spirit, haunting her dreams and stealing her peace. The villagers were frightened, lost in their sorrow, and Clara felt the weight of their collective suffering pressing upon her heart like a heavy stone. She had to confront the specter one more time, but how could she face her? The thought of her icy gaze sent shivers down Clara's spine. As the moon reappeared in its full glowing phase, casting an unsettling light across the land, Clara knew she had a choice to make. Was it too late to uncover the secrets buried deep within the village? There were whispers of the woman seeking redemption, but Clara understood that redemption often came at a steep price, one she might not be ready to pay. Yet, summoning her courage once more, Clara prepared to face the chilling truth sewn into the fabric of the eerie stories that had long adorned her hometown like a grotesque painting hanging in a forsaken gallery. That night, Clara whispered a soft prayer into the night air, igniting the spark of her brave curiosity once again. With every passing moment, the woods beckoned her, calling her closer to the heart of the mystery. She could feel the pull of despair pushing against her spirit, as if the shadows in the trees were trying to warn her away, but she pushed on, resolute and determined to confront the darkness looming before her. The soft crunch of leaves beneath her feet echoed in the stillness, a reminder of the path she had chosen. As Clara reached the sinister edge of the woods, the shadows wrapped tightly around her like thick, putrid smoke, waiting for her arrival. The air grew colder, and an unsettling knot twisted in her stomach. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stand tall, even in the face of fear. Clara scanned the trees, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers desperate to grasp at her. She focused on the faint moonlight filtering through the dark canopy above, illuminating patches of ground where fleeting glimmers of hope flickered like tiny stars. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves reached her ears, and Clara's heart raced. She felt an electric charge in the air, a sensation tinged with awe and fear. "Is anyone there?" she called out softly, her voice trembling as it echoed through the stillness. She strained to listen. There it was again, the rustle, followed by a fleeting shadow. Clara's pulse quickened, yet she held her ground. This was it. This was the confrontation she had sought. The air thickened around her, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle and her heart race. Clara remembered Mrs. Hawkins's words, the tales of the woman in white lingering, searching for someone, for something. If the woman existed, perhaps she could find a way to communicate, to learn the truth behind the curse that hung heavily over Eldridge Hollow. With her heart pounding like a drum, Clara stepped further into the woods, determined to unmask the enigma that haunted her dreams. The chilling wind whispered through the trees, carrying their secrets through the thicket. As she moved deeper, Clara felt her resolve strengthen with each step. This was her village. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life, not now, not ever. Then, as if by magic, the air shifted. Clara paused, the world around her growing eerily quiet. She felt the presence long before she saw her, a ghostly figure emerging from the shadows beneath the trees. Her heart raced, a frightful mix of terror and determination flooding her veins. The woman in white stood before her, her flowing dress shimmering softly in the silver glow of the moonlight, an otherworldly aura wrapping around her like a shimmering veil. Clara, the woman spoke, her voice low like the rustling of leaves. "You seek answers, do you not?" Clara gulped, her throat dry, but she nodded bravely, her courage pushing her to respond. "I do. Please, I need to understand. What happened to you?" The woman's eyes, deep pools of sorrow, bore into Clara's soul as if reading her innermost thoughts. "Long ago, something dear to me was taken, lost to the cruel hands of fate. Betrayal clung to my heart, just as the mist clings to the night. My sorrow is my curse, and it has woven itself into the fabric of this village. I wander in search of peace, but the balance of our world has been disturbed." Clara felt her heart twist in empathy. She was no longer afraid. "I want to help. I want to set things right. Tell me what you need." The woman in white hesitated, glancing around as if afraid to trust Clara. But when she gazed back, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Awaken the hearts of this village, remind them of the bonds we share. Only by embracing love can the pain of the past be released. Will you help me?" Clara nodded, understanding the weight of this mission laid before her. "I will, I promise." With a gentle smile, the woman began to fade, the shadows around her swirling, enveloping her into the night. "Thank you, brave soul. You may be the light to guide us all home." As Clara stood beneath the ancient trees, the thrill of the journey ahead filled her with newfound purpose. The curse would be lifted. Clara straightened her back, determined to confront the villagers with the truth she had learned. No longer did she feel trapped by fear. She felt empowered, ready to call forth a new dawn for Eldridge Hollow. The woman's plea ignited a fierce fire within her heart, and she promised herself that she, Clara, would be the beacon of hope for her village. With renewed determination, Clara turned away from the woods, ready to share the story of the woman in white and the promise of redemption with her neighbors. The shadows may have been dark, but Clara could already see the glimmers of light breaking through, weaving together the tapestry of her village's past with the promise of a new beginning. The moon cast a ghastly light as Clara entered the forest once more, its pale glow illuminating the twisted branches above. The trees towered like sentinels, standing tall and silent, shifting ever so slightly in the gentle breeze. They whispered warnings that Clara dared not heed, their voices muffled by her pounding heart. Each step she took sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of dread and determination driving her toward the place where she first encountered the woman in white. As she approached the stone wall, a prickling sensation crept over her skin. Clara felt her heart thud violently, as if trying to escape the confines of her chest. This was the very spot where the woman had appeared, a spectral figure caught between two worlds, flickering like a candle in the wind. The stillness of the forest thickened the air, accentuating every rustle in the leaves, transforming ordinary sounds into something sinister, demoniac laughter echoing through the night. "You can't turn back now," she whispered to herself, even as a shiver of apprehension coursed through her body. The ground felt damp beneath her shoes, and her breath quickened as thoughts raced through her mind. What if the woman was angry? What if she didn't want to be helped? Clara could feel the weight of fears pressing down on her, yet she pressed forward, her resolve steadfast as she neared the wall. Suddenly, Just as she reached her destination, a thick fog crept in, enveloping her like a heavy shroud. The air grew cloying and damp, making her feel as if she were wading through a nightmarish sea. Then in the distance, a figure began to materialize, emerging from the haze. It was the woman in white. Her sorrowful expression was etched with something unexpected, an intense rage, as she turned to face Clara. "You seek to understand me," she intoned, her voice layered with pain, each word vibrating with a sinister undertone that sent chills down Clara's spine. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she met the woman's piercing gaze that seemed to delve into her very soul. I did not mean to disturb you," she stammered, her voice shaky. "I want to know what happened. I wish to help." The answer to her predicament hung heavy in the air, wrought with both terror and hope, but the woman's expression swiftly shifted from sorrow to fury. "The townsfolk sell their souls and claim my presence as mere tales to scare children in the dark," she hissed, her voice rising like a storm. The wind picked up around them, causing her white dress to flutter wildly like jagged ribbons. Clara felt the coldness penetrate her bones as she listened, realizing that this was a woman trapped between the world of the living and the realm of the lost. "Help me find peace," the woman begged, her voice now devoid of anger, replaced by a desperate plea that tugged at Clara's heartstrings. "Uncover the truth hidden beneath the roots of this forsaken place." The weight of her request hung between them like thick chains, binding Clara to the very fabric of the woman's sorrow. It felt as though the trees themselves leaned closer, listening intently, eager for whatever fate lay ahead. Clara nodded, her throat dry, unable to articulate her thoughts as an unholy pact seemed to form. She knew she would have to root through the village's secrets, even though dread filled her heart at the mere thought of what she might discover. Would she find hope or further horror? This was a risk that trembled before her, its jagged edges promising only pain, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to uncover the betrayals and tragedies that had woven the threads of the woman's curse, or else face the consequences hidden in the shadows. Days turned into a grinding routine, each moment tinged with a sense of urgency and fear as Clara began her investigation into Eldridge Hollow's past. She spent hours at the village library, poring over dusty old books and yellowed pages, searching for hints of the woman's history. Some of the villagers were wary, their eyes clouded with suspicion, but they still offered pieces of information, reluctant to share their culpability yet unable to resist the pull of gossip. Clara discovered stories of families torn apart by jealousy and greed, lives lost to the avarice of a few, and tragedies buried in the whispers of time. A local family had befriended the woman in white years ago, only to betray her trust in favor of personal gain. The readings revealed grotesque truths that made her stomach churn. The scars of the past smeared across the village's narrative like blood on a once pristine canvas. Unease settled deeper into Clara's heart as these fragments of the village's dark history compiled before her eyes, grotesque patterns of betrayal woven into the fabric of her once peaceful home. With every revelation, the air around her thickened, suffocating her with dread. But what could she do with this knowledge? There seemed to be no way to absolve the past, no way to bring peace to a woman whose sorrow was now intertwined with her own fate. One evening, as Clara stood at the edge of the woods, the memories of her findings weighing heavily on her, the silhouette of the woman approached her with urgency. "You must be ready," the woman warned, her tone foreboding, each word a chilling reminder of the darkness that loomed. "Now you know the truth, but the darkness has a hunger. It will consume you if you do not act." Clara felt the walls closing in, her heart racing in response to the woman's chilling words. Each night, the misfortune that afflicted the village grew more intense. A local father disappeared under gruesome circumstances, and darkness descended upon Eldridge Hollow like a heavy fog. Rumors began to swirl like autumn leaves around Clara's connection with the supernatural. Whispers of the curse filled the air, infecting the townsfolk with paranoia, and Clara's every venture outside turned into an accusation. Fear gripped the village, foreboding etched into every face, every conversation, transforming the once familiar streets into a minefield of whispered doubts. Clara felt as though she was walking through a dream-turned-nightmare. The villagers' desire for a scapegoat morphed into a frenzied demand for justice, a bloodlust stirred by grief and anger. No matter how hard she tried to explain herself, Clara felt herself retreating further into the shadows. But the more Clara fought to seek redemption for the woman in white, the more the darkness embraced her, wrapping its cold tendrils around her heart. She became a prisoner in her own home, trapped by the shadows of her choice. The warmth of her dreams turned icy, and she sensed the haunting presence of the woman in white everywhere she turned, a malevolent observer lurking at the fringes of her existence. Her mind raced with questions. Was this how the woman felt? Trapped in a cycle of despair with no apparent escape? Finally, Clara could no longer ignore the heartbeat of dread as the townsfolk gathered like a ravenous mob outside her home. The atmosphere crackled with anger as accusations were hurled like stones meant to injure. They accused her of summoning the specter, of bringing forth the curse upon their village. Clara's heart sank as uncertainty settled in. Had she truly been the harbinger of doom she had tried so desperately to fight? She glanced outside, and her breath caught in her throat. "What do you want from me?" she cried, voice trembling as she looked into the sea of angry faces. Their expressions were a mix of fear and rage, eyes darting around wildly, searching for a source for their pain. It felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Shadows danced around her as she struggled against despair, her heart racing. "I didn't do anything. Leave the girl alone," a voice shouted from the crowd, someone standing up for her. Clara strained to see the person who dared to defend her, but the mob surged, drowning out caring words with harsh accusations. Clara's head spun, the noise echoing in her ears like a broken bell. "She's the one who spoke with the ghost," another voice shouted, a man Clara recognized but didn't know well enough to plead with. "She's bringing darkness upon us." The mob's anger and grief grew more potent, suffocating her. Clara felt as though the floor was giving way beneath her. Panic surged within her. She couldn't understand how things had spiraled so far out of control. All she wanted to do was to untangle the truth to help the woman in white find peace, not to cause chaos. The woman's spirit loomed larger in her mind as she grasped for hope. She remembered the urgency of their pact. Was she losing the chance to save her? The weight of that thought was unbearable, and tears blurred her vision as she faced the angry crowd. How could she explain the truth when they were blinded by fear? "I'm not a witch," Clara shouted, frustration rising in her chest like bile. "I only wanted to help." But her voice faded under the rising tide of fury and grief. Suddenly, as if responding to her plea, the fog rolled in thicker around her, and a chilling wind howled through the trees. Clara's heart raced as the silhouette of the woman in white appeared amid the gathering storm. Her expression was intense, neither angry nor sad, but determined. The electric charge in the air grew stronger, and it seemed the spirit meant to speak. "Listen to me." The woman's voice rang strong, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. The crowd momentarily hushed, their fear turning into confusion as they gazed upon her ghostly figure. "I am bound by the pain that this village has hidden for too long," she proclaimed, her voice echoing, wrapped in sorrow yet filled with power. "I am not the enemy, nor is Clara. You must look within yourselves to find the truth." As Clara looked at the woman, she felt a flicker of courage ignite inside her. Together, they were powerful, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could expose the hidden secrets that had brought about pain. "Please," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "You have to remember what happened. If we all look together, maybe we can find a way to set you free." The crowd shifted restlessly, a wave of uncertainty washing over them. Clara seized this moment, stepping forward and shouting above the rising wind, "Look at the truth of your own hearts. The anger, the grief, don't let it consume you like it consumed her." Silence enveloped the woodland as the moon's light broke through the clouds, illuminating Clara's tear-streaked face and the ghostly woman beside her. She hoped against hope that the villagers would listen, that they would see the truth shining through the shadows. It seemed as though time paused, every heartbeat amplified in the stillness. Clara could feel the tension in the air, a fragile thread connecting her to the villagers. Would they break or embrace the truth together? One villager, an elderly woman Clara had known her whole life, stepped forward. "I remember," she began, voice trembling but unwavering, "the tales passed down. The stories of betrayal, of how we turned on our own." Other villagers began to murmur among themselves, the truth surfacing like waves breaking upon a shore. "Yes," Clara cried, locking eyes with her fellow villagers, "help me help her. Together we can find the way to bring peace to Eldridge Hollow." And just like that, a moment of unity sparked in the air like the first light of dawn. The shadows shifted, and it felt as though the bond of suffering was being undone, thread by thread. Clara knew they could do this, face whatever horror lay within the village's history and heal the scars that had haunted them for so long. In that moment, without hesitation, Clara reached out her hand toward the woman in white. "We will set you free, I promise," she vowed, her heart full of determination. The woman's gaze softened, filled with a hope that Clara had thought lost forever. The crowd, finally recognizing their own sorrows, began to step forward as well, their eyes filled with understanding. Together, they faced the past, ready to confront the darkness, and Clara knew deep in her heart that this was only the beginning. The reckoning had started, and she was ready to unravel the story. As the torches flickered in the night, casting grotesque shadows on the walls of Clara's once calm home, her heart raced. The warm glow of the flames was now replaced by the cold, angry faces of the villagers standing outside. Clara sat huddled inside, trembling as their voices blended into a dreadful chorus, full of accusations and blame. They were convinced that she had awakened a malevolent spirit, a terrible force they believed had cursed them all. Panic tightened like a noose around her throat, and fear clawed at her heart, making her feel as though she were trapped in a nightmare with no escape. "Bring her out!" shouted a man from the angry mob, his voice dripping with venomous righteousness. It pierced Clara like a dagger. She buried her head in her palms, hot tears flowing down her cheeks. "I didn't summon anything," she wanted to scream. "I only wanted to find the truth. But truths are tricky and sometimes they come wrapped in darkness." Clara felt the heavy weight of her situation crashing down upon her, and she was swallowed by despair. How had seeking the truth led her here, to this heart-stopping moment of reckoning? Suddenly, the door to her home crashed open with a loud bang that echoed through the night. Clara gasped, instinctively flinging her hands in front of her face to shield against the shadows that rushed in, enveloping her like a cold fog. The mob surged forward, their faces contorted with rage and fear, and it felt as if they were beings possessed by some wicked force. The sorrow that twisted their hearts had morphed into a desperate desire for revenge. Clara's heart pounded painfully against her ribs as they seized her, dragging her from the safety of her home into the chaos outside. "Clara, no!" yelled a familiar voice, but Clara could not tell who it was. Amidst the shouts and screams, she searched desperately for Mrs. Hawkins, a wise woman from the village who had always defended the truth. Clara yearned for someone to stand by her side, someone to say that this was all a terrible mistake. But in her darkest hour, no ally appeared, and the distance between her and the safety of her home grew greater. The elders, once respected leaders and protectors of tales about the spirits, now stood among the townsfolk, their eyes filled with fear and anger. They echoed the cries of the villagers, letting Clara's name become a dark mark on the history of Eldridge Hollow. "She is the one who has brought this curse to us all. She must pay," they shouted, their voices rising like a tempest, unleashing years of sorrow and despair upon her. Clara felt her heart shatter like fragile glass. No one believed that she was innocent. In the center of the village, a makeshift altar was set up, and Clara's throat tightened as they forced her to the ground. She looked up at the moon, hoping to find a sliver of hope shining down to guide her, but it felt far away, dimmed by the weight of their collective grief. The woman in white appeared behind the villagers, her ghostly form shimmering in the moonlight. Clara had seen her before, and though she felt sympathy for the sad spirit, now that sadness seemed glimmering with something darker, an angry, gnawing hunger for revenge. "Your presence has only fueled their anguish," the woman whispered hollowly, her words curling around Clara like cold mist. Shadows clung to her like dark tendrils, feeding off the fear in the air. Clara felt the betrayal weigh heavily upon her as she locked eyes with the spectral figure. "I did not mean to disturb anything, I sought to help you," Clara pleaded, desperation bubbling in her chest, but her words were lost in the chaos of the crowd. The piercing gazes of the villagers shifted back and forth between Clara and the woman in white, creating a tense atmosphere thick with dread. "You brought her here," a man shouted, his voice rising above the turmoil, filled with rage. "We demand you pay the price, for your curiosity has doomed us all." Clara felt her stomach churn as the crowd's fury intensified, each word hammering against her like the weight of a falling tree. The terrible truth settled around her, wrapping tighter like a noose. She had sought to understand, to explore the depths of the mystery, and now she faced a price far greater than she had imagined. In that moment, Clara realized something chilling. The price had already been paid long before her arrival in this place. The woman in white was not just a spectral figure lost in time, she was the embodiment of despair, pulling others into her dark web. Clara was to become another chapter in that sorrowful tale, and she was terrified. The villagers, fueled by their grief, began to chant. Their voices rose in a blood-curdling hymn, wrapping around Clara like a thick rope, suffocating her under the weight of their wrath. Clara, no. The chant echoed, turning into a haunting melody that wove through the night. Shadows danced menacingly, flickering under the torchlight as if they had come to life. Clara felt the darkness pressing against her, invading her thoughts. It was true. Sometimes the weight of sins passed down through generations can haunt the living, pulling them into an abyss filled with sorrow alongside lost spirits. The woman in white, with her pale face illuminated in the moonlight, extended her hand towards Clara, the invitation sealing her fate. Each heartbeat thundered in her ears as hope and dread intertwined. Would reaching out for her bring a chance of freedom, or would it bind her forever to this darkness? With a desperate leap, Clara reached for the ethereal form. Perhaps there was still a spark of light to be found in that shadowed embrace. But as their eyes locked, a shiver crawled across Clara's skin. She felt the icy grip of regret tightening around her heart. This was not the redemption she imagined. The boundaries between life and death blurred in that moment, and with it, the certainty of her future faded into oblivion. There was no escaping the horror now. All that remained was devastation, leaving behind nothing but an echo of sadness. The village of Eldridge Hollow would remember this night, not in glorious tales of bravery or tales of truth, but in whispers of fear darkening the air. Clara's cries echoed through the desolate streets and danced among the branches of the forgotten woods, wailing a mournful tune that would linger for years to come. Yet, as the shadows swirled around her, a chilling presence snaked through the air, a haunting laughter that mingled with the cries of despair lingering like the heavy mist of the night. Curiosity comes with a cost that cannot be repaid, echoed the voice of the woman in white, chilling Clara to her core, an unshakable truth blossoming in her heart. Those who dare to seek the truth will find themselves shackled to the very darkness they wish to understand. In that moment, Clara understood the power of the spirit she had awakened, a power fueled by the pain and sorrow of those who had come before her. It was a weight that neither she nor the villagers could bear alone. The spirit hungered. It thrived on grief, feeding off the despair that lived within the hearts of the angry villagers. In their darkest hour, they had chosen a scapegoat, the one person who had merely sought to uncover the truth. Those haunting shadows continued to spiral around her, like dancers caught in a deadly waltz, enveloping Clara in their relentless grip. As the villagers stood witness to the unfolding chaos, their expressions shifted from fury to realization. Clara was neither a villain nor a hero. She was simply a girl who had dared to step into a world of darkness, driven by a noble desire to help and understand. "Please," Clara cried, her voice breaking as she fought against the despair threatening to pull her under. "I only wanted to bring you peace. I didn't want this." But the shadows roared in response, their laughter echoing off the walls of the village. The villagers looked on, their earlier anger replaced by a flickering flicker of guilt, yet they remained frozen in place, bound by fear of the spirit and the chaos that surrounded them. As the last rays of moonlight bathed Clara in eerie silver, she understood the magnitude of her choices. The woman in white held millions of untold stories within her, each of them carved from loss, memorials to those who sought the truth before her. Clara was now entwined in that endless narrative, a thread that weaved through time, a testament to the power of grief and curiosity intertwined. The final embrace was upon Clara, heavier than she could bear. She closed her eyes, feeling the cold tendrils of darkness wrap around her deeper than any shadow could ever cast. She didn't want to let go of life, of hope, but there was no way out. As she was drawn toward the chilling presence of the woman, Clara realized that the truth was not simply about answers, it was about the price we pay for those answers. The village fell silent as Clara's cries faded, swallowed by the shadows that thrived in the hearts of those who remained. And thus, the legend of Eldridge Hollow grew darker, not marked by bravery but haunted by the memory of a girl who simply wanted to know the truth and ended up becoming part of a greater sorrow that echoed through the ages.